Hello, testing, testing, 1, 2. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another glorious episode of the Cootie Cast. I am Madeline Maye. Joining me, as always, is
Jess Dawn. Oops, I mean Jess Lynne.
And today we are going to be talking about a very interesting and honestly still relevant little indie horror comedy from 2007 called Teeth.
Surprise, it's not There's Something About Mary.
It's not. We are going to go back to committee on that one and reevaluate if we ever do that one again.
However, I will say I watched part of There's Something About Mary first, and it really primed me to enjoy this movie.
Very cool. I'm going to watch There's Something About Mary again on my own and decide if it is actually worth it or not. Anyway. But
All right. Well, so starting us off and with the history and the research as we always do. So as Madeline said, Teeth is a 2007 American comedy horror film, and it was written and directed by Mitchell Lichtenstein. And it premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. So the budget, it was not a big hit. Its budget was $2 million. It made $2.3 million, so it broke even, but that's about it. It's more widely remembered in its legacy than it was at the time, though critics at the time did largely like it. It has more or less an 80% rating from critics at the time, saying it was more of a feminist take on horror therein. And it plays with kind of the mythological vagina dentata, as the movie loves to explain.
It's a fun word to say, to be fair. Vagina dentata.
That's true. And, there's really not a whole lot to say about this one in terms of the making. I mean, the main actress, Jess Wexler, or Wexler, someone please correct me in the comments if you care, received the Grand Jury Prize for acting, and she does a pretty good job. They all do. It's well acted.
That's interesting.
That's about what I've got on it.
Did the director, writer ever do anything else besides this, out of curiosity?
Let me look it up.
Because it is one of those movies where you're like, what else has this guy done, if anything?
Let's see.
We're looking at it right now.
He has a whole filmography. As a director, he was also an actor. So he did the movie Happy Tears and Angelica.
I don't know those.
I think this is probably his biggest budget thing. He's also directed episodes of Cheers, Law and Order, Homicide: Life on the Street, Man. So he's done probably a little bit more TV directing, but nothing where, this is probably where you're going to connect his name the most.
Yes. I actually saw this movie in theaters during its initial run. In 2007, I was in my senior year of high school, and I was just starting to become aware of a larger film world, meaning that I would actually start to go online and look up what is happening with film and things like that, and I would be trying to learn more about indie movies and things like that. And through all of this, I discovered this movie that had an insane sounding premise to me at the time, and I was also seeing that it was getting pretty good reviews, and I told my friends, this is before I transitioned, so it's a bunch of guys, and they're like, oh my god, that's so terrifying, what's going on, a bunch of just kids. And so I think I accidentally have the heat on. Let me go fix that if we do. Jess will entertain you while I do
Well, I was around at that time, but and I saw a bunch of trailers for it, but it did not seem like anything I would want to see. So I did not see this movie until today. So thank you, Madeline, for introducing it to me.
Yeah, so when we were watching it, the idea was oh man, what if there's a toothed vagina? That's the scariest thing ever. Oh no, cringe. Oh, my penis, what's gonna happen? And so here's my interesting story, is that we all decided to go see it, and it was a bunch of very, very uncool, unwoke, even by 2007 standards, guys just making a big just show of everything, being rowdy, and all this other stuff.
This is also before you had female friends.
This is before I had female friends. I didn't have that until relatively recently in my life. That's a whole other story. But it was like, I remember it was extremely rowdy. Like, everyone was kind of just like a little crazy, and everyone's kind of a little wild. I remember one guy peed in an empty water bottle on the way to the screening, which really pissed me off because it was my car that I was driving. And we get to the theater, and we sit in the back, and we watch it, and my friends cannot hold it together. They are just being so disruptive and so noisy at this movie in this theater that was, we had to go somewhere because it was an indie film. We had to find this theater that had it, and they were so rude and unchilled that the theater kicked us out. I didn't even get to finish the movie on my first time, and I was really fucking pissed because I had really wanted to see this movie, and I, drove all the way here. We bought tickets, and it's all gone. And I
don't worry, people. She got better friends.
Yes, I got better friends, but I was so upset because I did want to see this movie. It sounded really interesting, and the opening was like so well shot and composed. I'm like, oh, this is actually more than just the typical kind of horror that was coming out in 2007, which, for those who don't remember, like, that was the year Paranormal Activity dropped, so a lot of films were very much in that. I love Paranormal Activity, but that kind of started a trend of film that was more reality-based, by reality television-based, I mean.
Well, and it was also, this was earlier, but everything was still very much off of, like, the sea change that was the Blair Witch Project.
Yes, absolutely.
So it was a lot of shaky cam, it was a lot of docu-style, not a lot of message media and horror.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, this does kind of predate the A24 horror method. I guess now they would call it, like, elevated horror, which is such a pretentious name. I hate that that's what the genre is called. But long story short, after this happened, I decided to see the film by myself at a different theater, where I really liked it. I found myself thinking, oh, this is a really cool idea and a really cool concept, and I didn't have the immediate repulsion that my guy friends did, which is like, whoa, so weird that I would have a different reaction to the guys that, like, thinking, oh, this girl's cool.
See, what's funny though, so I did discuss this movie with my partner before coming over, and he also watched it in theaters around that same time, also, around that same age. So, and his reaction was, it was okay, good enough movie. He had more to say about, like, his unpleasantness with watching it was about how much the main character gets abused.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess this is probably a good time to go into the plot summary.
Yeah, so as basically as the plot is pretty simple in the movie. Basically, we have this girl, Dawn, who is at the start of the movie a extremely Christian, extremely conservative, and she is part of one of those promise ring groups.
Purity cult.
Purity cult kind of stuff. And through all of this, she's kind of being tempted by this new guy that she's very clearly attracted to, and he's attracted to her. While this is going on, everyone makes fun of her for being what they would call a prude. And this also seems to be a town where anything sexual is taboo, to the point where they sticker out vaginas in a school science textbook, which is a very funny scene.
It's explicitly stated where this is. This movie is set in Austin, Texas.
Yeah. So Austin, Texas, and a lot of it's very heightened. A lot of it's very much playing onto the high school film kind of tropes. It's kind of winking at the camera. The point is, at some point, she has a sexual encounter with this guy, and wow, wouldn't you know it, she has a toothed vagina. And
I'm gonna stop right there.
I know I'm skipping some stuff.
No,
yeah.
no, I don't care about the stuff you're skipping. She doesn't have a sexual encounter. She's raped.
Yes, so she is raped, which is a very very important detail. Not only just because it's rape, but it also just because it does establish what we're going to find out are the rules of the vagina dentata, as it is called. What we discover is that she is able to control when her vagina cuts off somebody's dick or fingers or whatever you decide to put into there if she is not having a good time. So it basically creates a natural protection against rapists.
It's a literal bear trap.
It's folks. A literal bear. Yeah, it's literally like, hey, this is happening. Like, yeah, and it from there gets into a bunch of strange stuff. God, my brain's all out of it. Yeah, thank you. I don't know. I'm out of it today. It's been a weird day.
Basically, she's flirting with this dude. They go to this cave with their other friends where he assaults her, and then she, uses the teeth. He falls into the river and disappears. She is brought to school the next day to have another purity lecture, which does not go well. She's freaking out. She doesn't know what to do. She starts she starts like Googling mutation with her vagina, which then comes up with vagina dentata, which is a normal thing that Google would do.
It's a very there is a lot of camp in the movie. Like, it is a comedy, I think, probably more than it is a horror. And there's a lot of really goofy moments that I did not remember the first time I saw this film. How just how goofy it was.
Yeah, it gets really silly. And it did make me laugh a couple times. So she goes to a gynecologist to try and figure out what's going on, which at first is just uncomfortable, which, as anyone who's ever been to a gynecologist knows, it's just awful.
This very creepy guy being extremely creepy.
And then he sexually assaults her by sticking his ungloved fingers up her vagina, which then she bites all 4 of his fingers off. And then there is the nerdy guy at school that she somehow interacts with, who she has no interaction with prior in the movie, but now she does, and apparently he's her hero, because all of the mythology says that the vagina dentata must be defeated by a hero.
Yes, at this point, she doesn't really understand how it works. Like, it's just everyone she has sex with, she's going to cut the dick off, or if there's something else going on. So, initially she thinks, oh, maybe you're like the chosen one to make it, to make me still enjoy it. But while the first sexual encounter does go safely, the guy does not get his dick cut off. The second time they engage in sex, it is awful for her. The guy is like literally bragging on the phone to his friend while they're having sex. He's being an absolute creep. Total, like,
He's dating her for a bet.
Yes.
And this is ignoring the backstory. So the backstory that's going on, there's kind of a B-plot, which is that she has an awful stepbrother who is violent, and he's evil because he listens to heavy metal music, y'all. And he has a girlfriend that he treats like shit. So during the background of this, he and his girlfriend were having sex, and the mom apparently had some sort of seizure. Her mom, their stepbrother. And is going to the hospital. So she goes to this guy asking him for help, and he gives her a drug, and then is like, you know how I can help you? Sexual healing. And it works. She's all into it until he's an asshole and brags about the bet the next day.
Yeah, and then she bites the dick off. And this is like, oh, okay, so she can control it.
Yeah, and that's the first time she deliberately does it.
Yes.
And then she finds out stepbrother continues to be the worst. That they heard, the stepbrother and the girlfriend were home. They heard the mom screaming, didn't do anything. He almost kills the stepfather with his Rottweiler, who is a very cute dog. And then basically the stepfather and the girlfriend, for some reason, goes to the hospital and confesses all of this. So Dawn decides to seduce her stepbrother, who is weird and creepy and flirting with her this whole movie.
Because the stepmom dies. I don't know if we said that. Yeah,
right. She dies as a result of whatever went on.
Yeah, whatever her condition, sickness is. She had some kind of episode, and it caused her to die.
Yeah, the movie doesn't specify. The movie does not care. So she decides to take revenge by getting her stepbrother. So she seduces him, and right when they're about to have sex, or after he's just started, he remembers that when they were a child, she bit his finger. And then she cuts his dick off. He sets the dog to attack her. The dog eats his penis instead.
Good for her.
And she runs away. She leaves town to hitchhike away to escape, where a creepy man picks her up in the car and locks the doors.
Yeah, and now this is her superhero origin story, I guess. It's a very strange ending, but I also understand why it was the way it was at the time. But that's basically it. It's a very simple film, with honestly, I think a very cool idea. Is it 100% successful? No. It's absolutely of its time. 2007 was not nearly as progressive as it is now, and even now it's not that progressive, honestly.
In some ways, we might even say it's regressive.
It's regressive in a lot of ways. I gotta close the door. But continue.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, it is a simple story, but I think some of the main ideas are interesting. Like, you're clearly supposed to sympathize with the character of Dawn, which I found kind of interesting. Like, not to say that she deserved any of the abuse that happened to her, but the first 20 minutes of the movie, I found Dawn pretty unlikable. Like, she's fully into the purity cult stuff. And it's not just like, I want to save myself till marriage, which is fine. You know, however you want to experience or not experience your sexuality, it goes without saying, that's up to you. But it's more that it was very preachy and very explicitly so, like indoctrinating kids, quoting back Bible scriptures at her, even when she's losing it. Like, every response they're saying to like her very clearly having a breakdown is just rote, and it's like they were just like pulling Bible stuff. So it's very clear this is not even a normal religious group.
Yes. She basically goes through this transformation of becoming a more independent, more full character as the film goes on, because she goes from basically being terrified of any kind of sexual encounter, and as we see, for good reason, everyone is a fucking creep around her, and when this horrible rape happens to her, and like there is like this satisfaction when she bites the guy's dick off. Like, the guy is really creepy the entire time, and I think it's playing on the very popular for 2007 friend-zoned nice guy trope. I think it's very much commentating on how that is not a good person, and again, I think for the time that is fairly progressive.
I also would like to say I think it's probably referencing a little bit of Buffy the Vampire Slayer season 2, where she has sex with Angel and then he turns into a monster. So this is right before he turns into a monster.
Yes. Also, we have a comment from Robert Borland. Hi, Robert. The sexual experience, especially non-consensual experiences leading to growth plotline, is a bit problematic, in my opinion. Yes, you can tell that this film was written and directed by a man. So there is, unfortunately, a lot of like, well, if we reverse it, that's good. Feminism is when you do it to men instead of men doing it to women kind of attitude.
Yeah, and we were going to get more into it, but might as well go there now. So I have mixed feelings about this one. I appreciate what it was trying to do. I don't think it did it fully successfully. And some of that, a lot of it, honestly, is Dawn's emotional range. Like, Dawn not only goes from being sexually assaulted, which is an incredibly damaging experience to anyone, but also losing her whole identity, because everything that we're shown of her up till that point is purity culture. And whether or not I personally like it, like, that was who she was. And you don't see her grieving that. She goes from that to her mother being ill and being sexually assaulted twice in a row to being all in to this dude that she's never shown interest in before, but that's okay because she enjoyed it. And then she becomes the monster. I mean, the big idea of the movie is basically other people's monstrous acts make Dawn into a monster. And that's an interesting one, but the way it goes about it, it takes away from Dawn being a character that's relatable, and it also, it frames growth through trauma in a way that's just not how growth through trauma works. And I'm speaking, in my professional capacity as a therapist, like, there is such a thing as traumatic growth, but that takes time and work, and you have to actually get through the trauma first. And this movie, that's not what this movie's trying to do.
No, the film, while I do think it does a lot of things right, its biggest problem is that it just doesn't quite understand the experience of being a woman and a woman who is raped. It doesn't understand that because it's, again, written by a guy and directed by a guy, and you can tell that by how it reacts to its core premise, because the film is basically saying, well, if she's able to just bite off a person's dick, then it's like the rape is okay because she can, like, fight against it. Like, well, no, the act is still horrifying and terrible, even if this is a part of it. It's not like it's not like, oh, like, watch out guys, what if women had this? Like, it's not understanding, like, what parts of this horrifying experience are horrifying to us.
Well, and the other part of it is, like, even though she can fight back, she's still raped. Like,
exactly, yes.
It doesn't take away from her experience of having gone through that assault or what that's going to mean for her. I mean, and she lost her whole life. The ending where she's running away, she's leaving because, presumably, she killed someone.
Yeah.
She's now a murderer, and she didn't want to be, and there's no way for her to explain this. There's no language.
Yeah, it is a very much a showing of a certain kind of feminism, which is kind of like what I said. Like, feminism is when a woman is on top. Feminism is when a woman's doing the raping or the killing instead of the guy. And it's like, yeah, only a dude would think that. I mean, I don't know how else to really say it. All of that being said, I do think that what the film is trying to say, and I feel like, especially for the era in which it was made, like, we're still 7 years away from stuff like The Witch and much better representations of female sexual autonomy. I think in a lot of ways, a film like this kind of had to happen first in order for something like that to maybe come out later. That's a stretch, I know, to say, but I do think the fact that this was so terrifying to guys, like weirdo guys, I think that alone says that there is something being triggered here that needs to be triggered in these men that are like, oh my god, look at this is so creepy, it's so crazy, it's so scary, not my dick. Like, I like that it makes that kind of guy squirm. I think there is something to be said to that.
Well, I think, I mean, I agree. This is also a gotcha film. And I was going to make this comparison. So it's kind of like the book, An Autobiography of an Ex-Colored Man, which is, it's a book written in the 20s about, like, a post-Reconstruction era South, where a white passing black man decides to give up his race and live as a white person. And why I bring this up and how this relates? Well, it's written by an author, but in the book it's published as anonymous. And it left it where it seemed like this guy was just going off and living life as a white man, and this was very much back when the belief was that your race was tied in with your blood, so any degree of blood of a person of color makes you that race. So it was very much like a gotcha, what if a black man is sleeping with a white woman and you don't even know? And that's what this movie, the best interpretation I think is trying to do, of like, if you have sex with someone non-consensually, if you rape someone, what if she could do this? You should be afraid.
Which is like, that points out a fundamental problem in our society, of that is the one thing stopping a guy from raping a woman, that they might have a toothed vagina. Then we need to just fix the fuck out of our society, because holy shit. Also, if we want to be like weird cinema sins, it seems to be fine if you have sex in somebody's asshole. I think you could still rape a woman doing that, and that's even a plot point in the movie. strangely enough, we didn't really talk about this, but the stepbrother has this kind of incestuous infatuation and obsession with Dawn, and it's said in the beginning that her first kind of vagina dentata experience was when they were kids, and he put his finger in her vagina when they were children, and it bites the tip off. So, like that, which has led to him being terrified of vaginal sex for the rest of his life. That's a kind of a plot point / comedy moment between him and his girlfriend. So it's a lot, and I think again, it probably is more A for effort than A for great film, but I do stand by that I do find myself enjoying it, whether it's for the best reasons or not. Maybe I just like seeing guys get their dicks cut off, especially if they're douchebags. Maybe that's just something I'm into. It's just well, like there's a catharsis there to seeing all that, even if it's not being done in the best way. I did cheer a little bit. I did laugh at a lot of the movie. You know, it's yeah.
No, the movie is legitimately funny, especially the parts where things are being cut off. Like, it's playing that up for comic effect, and it worked. And I'm not normally necessarily the biggest horror comedy person. Like, you have to be pretty good to get me, and it got me, like, at least a couple times. Mm-hmm. Especially the gynecologist.
The gynecologist screaming, like, vagina dentata, it's real! That was extremely funny. Yeah, I think it chose to express these ideas in a very campy, parody sort of way, which is maybe not the best direction for something like this. Though, again, the real problem may just be the lack of insight the filmmakers had to what they wanted to talk about.
I will also say, I don't feel like men can't talk about sexual assault from a female perspective, or that men can't be sexually assaulted. That's just objectively not true.
Exactly.
It just, that experience didn't come through here. And yes. I think this would have really benefited from a female perspective. I would have loved to have seen some, and not to say it couldn't be funny, but I would have loved to see some of Dawn's inner life about, like, what she's thinking about and why, and we don't get that at all. And the movie is also, it's very simple. As Madeline said, it's very black and white. So everybody who is bad in this movie is cartoonishly bad. Like, there's no moderate bad. There's no, I can kind of empathize even if you made the wrong choice.
Yeah, and, the most important criticism of the film is that Dawn really isn't a character. And that's a big problem if that's what your movie's supposed to be. Showing, this cool feminist-based violence against men, but if your main character is basically like a B-movie monster, if your main character is basically the same as, like, I swapped heads with the brain of the monster, if that's the same role, path you're taking, it's not a great fit for this kind of movie, I think.
Well, and for me, I think the movie is interesting. I certainly think there's enough to talk about. This is a prime movie for a remake because it's got an interesting premise that has something to say but could be said better. I think this is, like, the perfect movie to be remade, and I would love to see one from a more feminist perspective, or at least the way we see it now. Yeah. That also being said, like, there are parts that really work. I think the music does a lot for this movie. Like, the musical score is amazing.
There are some really funny musical stings too. Like, one of my favorite early moments is when they say, she is talking to the guy that ends up raping her, and they're like, "Oh, I've never masturbated." He's like, "I haven't done it, elite in God's eyes," and does like a musical sting after he said, which is very funny. So there's a lot of craft in the film. Technically, it looks amazing. That was what drew me to the film as a kid, is that it looked a lot better than most horror films of the time. It's very well shot. It's very well composed. The music is great, and it's very powerful. It feels like a Sundance movie. Like, it feels like something you would see at a Sundance festival versus, like, your typical blockbuster horror, let alone horror comedy. There was a elevated technicality to it, which is much more common nowadays with, like, the A24 style of horror movie. But for its time, it was like, hey, this is pretty cool that this looks this good and it looks this way.
I also thought the special effects were decent, which was fun. There are definitely some genitalia you get to see get cut off. My favorite moment was when the first guy's name is Toby. He's also very invested in the purity culture. You know, in the eyes of God, he's still a virgin.
Yes.
So when that happens, he falls back into like presumably dreams. So she goes back to see like, is this a fever dream? Did this really happen? You know. And she sees his discarded penis with a crab crawling over it, which my immediate this is a visual gag of he's got crabs.
Yeah.
And it made me laugh. It might have been a cheap laugh, but it got me.
Yeah, I think one of the good messages of the film, and I think it's, again, I hate to keep saying it's a product of its time, but going back into 2007 and to me, I always think about this as a pre-Gamergate era. There was still a lot of positivity towards the nice guy stereotype. Like Toby looks like a guy right out of the OC. Like, a kind of character that in a lot of movies, even still now, would be the hero. And I think a lot of people that I believe would later become incels. Like this guy, it's interesting to see this specific kind of person turn out to be the villain. Like,
well, he's not the only one either.
Yeah, there's multiple.
The incel character archetype that I saw was actually Ryan.
Yeah,
like the nerdy.
Yes, there's multiple incel archetypes, honestly, in this film, and I think it's like now it's so obvious, like, that this was going to happen, that this guy was going to be a douchebag, that all these guys were going to be douchebag. But I remember at the time, it was slightly more surprising. And that could be how I was raised culturally. I was presenting as a man at the time. But also, it's just like there wasn't as many movies about this kind of stuff. In that sense, I think it was like, oh my God, yeah, this is not a good person. I shouldn't be like this myself as a person. Like, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess I do want to step back and talk about Ryan. So Ryan is the nerdy guy who becomes the hero. And why that comes up and becomes important is when Dawn is researching the vagina dentata, she's got to be defeated by a hero. So he convinces her to have sex on the pretense that he's her hero. And I think the movie is trying to set it up that he's the one nice guy, especially because he gets the one positive sexual experience in the movie. But I was always super skeeved out by him. He doesn't know her.
Well, he starts out the movie being a complete asshole too. Like, we see him in one of the opening scenes where he's just like clearly over sexualizing Dawn, and we know that this is gonna happen.
Yeah, and like part of why I'm wearing my T-shirt, when God made man, she was only joking, is because Dawn in the beginning of the movie, especially when she's part of the purity culture, she wears a ton of T-shirts like about how sex changes you. So like she's like over the top with the purity stuff, and he is very clearly wanting to have sex with her.
Yeah, I think that is a great visual gag of when she first kills a person, Toby. We see her wearing the sex changes everything shirt. It's like, yeah, this is not a subtle movie at all.
No. And it didn't need to be. My complaints are not that it's not subtle enough.
No, it's better that it's not subtle, honestly. I think with something like this, you want to be loud. Because, again, I feel like if the only point of this movie was to just scare the bros, we need to scare the bros. Get more bros scared. Because it's, sometimes you got to be that blunt with guys to be like, oh, shit.
I mean, I guess, as I said, my partner watched this movie and wasn't particularly affected by it because the whole thing is, if you are not a sexually assaulter, you're not going to be hurt.
Yeah, what a unicorn you have as a husband. He doesn't even want to sexually assault somebody. God, stop bragging over here. Jesus.
Anyway, but going back to my point... So, and why I want to talk about Ryan, he's the nerdy guy, he's the one raising his hand in class. He questions why they have blocked out the women's, sexual organs in the textbook, even though the men's is still there. And Like, so there's points where you're like, okay, he picks her up from a party and drives her home. Like, he looks like he's going to be framed to be, like, maybe not complicit in it, but to be, like, the nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
But then, immediately, when her mom is in the hospital after having some sort of episode, which we don't know what, and that eventually kills her, he gives her basically what's probably a Xanax, and then decides to convince her to have sex as a healing experience. Which works, I guess, but right away, like, you're impairing her consent. She's obviously not in a good emotional state. You're not actually a nice person. So I was not surprised with his heel turn.
Yeah, and you gotta imagine that the film is kind of playing with our playing with our emotions on this too, because the idea is that if he does have sex with her, then the film is telling us by its own established rules that he is a good person, which, again, it's hard because, like, this stuff is still rape and sexual assault. I think that's really is the biggest problem with the movie, is that it doesn't really seem to understand these things. And I think it kind of plays very loose with, like, how the film itself defines sexual assault, rape, and violence, and it's not great of the film to do. And I think a lot of that just becomes from the, well, you know, like, if I, as a guy, I would be quite concerned if a woman had the vagina dentata. I would think twice about, like, think twice about what? Like, what are you thinking twice about?
And meanwhile, you know, us as women are watching it going, I wish I had one of those.
Yeah, that was the one thing. I want a tooth vagina. I'm gonna see if I can get that. I'm gonna talk to the bottom surgeon. And that might not be covered on. You know, sometimes you gotta pay out of pocket to get that pocket. You know what I'm talking about? Like that pocket killer.
I mean, I said it before. I'll say it again. Bear trap.
Bear trap. I'm calling my bear trap Polly Pocket.
Indeed.
That's teeth. Some shark.
It's beautiful. Going back. Let's see, there's a comment, so that's why we're pausing.
Oh, no. Robert retracted the message.
So there was no comment. This never happened. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
If they decide to repost it, we will talk about it.
But
yes.
I was going to discuss the family a little bit, which I think is also interesting. So it's a blended family, bio mom of Dawn, stepfather, and stepbrother. What I thought was interesting, so Dawn has this idealized relationship with her mother and her stepfather, and then there's the brother who everybody hates. He's basically like, if you've seen Toy Story, Sid from the first Toy Story movie. Not what he grows up to be, like the awesome rockin' garbage dude, but the sadistic kid who destroys his toys.
Yes.
This is who he grows up to be. Who's also obsessed with his sister and a pedophile.
Yes.
You know, he sexually assaults her as a child when he's also a child.
And still wants to. Presumably, throughout their entire relationship, he has wanted to sexually assault her.
Oh, and that's explicitly clear. Like,
yeah, they say it. They say it in the film. It's not subtext.
Yeah, he has said, like, you know, like, he's very clearly flirting. He's mad at his parents for marrying so that she's his sister now, because that's not... So he is the one family member that's gross, and that's the black sheep. And he's a black sheep with everybody. But there's no questioning of, like, the authority in the household. There's also no real purity iconography. You don't see a lot of crosses in the house, so the family's not necessarily where that comes from. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, like, they even themselves, like, think it's kind of weird. You know, like, they are like, hey, we were a lot more sexually promiscuous when we were your age. It's all right. it's which I do think is interesting. Yes.
And I also think, and I'm glad the film didn't do this, where the stepfather is in no way inappropriate or sexualized. Like,
no.
And, like, there is a point where an authority figure takes advantage, and that's the gynecologist. But it's not the father, and it's not the teacher, you know? So I thought that was kind of an interesting commentary that her family life, with the exception of the brother that everyone hates, and that's also not subtext, like, that just comes up a bunch of times. Yeah, her family life is safe and secure, and it's only when that becomes compromised that she goes full monstrous.
Yes. Yeah, again, it's playing with a lot of ideas. It doesn't accomplish all of its goals that it set out to accomplish, but For me at least, enough of this film I think is really good, and I think enough of it, to me at least, holds up that I think I would recommend it if you are curious, just from how we've been talking about this movie. I would say give it a shot.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've gone into why it's interesting. In terms of why it's good, I'm kind of in the middle. Like, it's a fun enough movie to watch, especially if you turn your brain off. It does make you laugh, but there's a lot of parts that are problematic. There's a lot of parts that don't hold up. What I wanted this movie to be, and this just wasn't, I really wanted it to be like a revenge plot. I wanted it to be like, she's just full on, like, let's just take men down. They fucking deserve it. And that's not what this is. This movie is, as Madeline said, her villain origin story. It's just repeated abuse after repeated abuse, and that's not fun.
How would you compare this to a previous entry, Jennifer's Body?
I think Jennifer's Body is a better movie. It's got a female writer, so it's more sensitive to that subject matter. It's also more about female relationships, because Dawn really doesn't have any. She's got one female friend that she doesn't really get to talk to, and she's got her mom, which is shown mostly as this idealized, like, she loves her mom loves her, but they don't actually talk about anything. Mm-hmm. So there's this lack of female relationships in this movie, whereas Jennifer's Body has a bunch of female relationships. Like, the core relationship of Jennifer's Body is a female relationship.
Yeah.
And I think why that was allowed to happen, that's really explored, that, like, these girls are taken advantage of because no one is helping them. No one's looking out for them. Whereas here, bad stuff just randomly happens. And I kept wondering, why is everybody doing bad stuff to her? Like, I get that Dawn is supposed to be the prize because she's so pure and so open about it. And she's pretty. The actress is very pretty, but she's not, like, so ungodly pretty that no one would leave her alone. I just...
Damn, just say what you really mean.
Well, no, I mean, okay, so,
yeah.
Like, the way Jennifer's Body is shot, everybody wants Megan Fox. Like, everybody in the world.
Yes.
And the movie really highlights that. And she's the popular girl, so it's not even just that she's beautiful, which she is. It's socially acceptable to want her. Whereas, Dawn in this movie is the weird kid. She's a very pretty weird kid. But the movie is not highlighting that about her.
No, and I definitely agree with that. To me, I see it as because she is, part of the purity cult. It is that conquest of having sex with somebody that, like, nobody else has. I think that virgin, like, I was the one to break her before anyone else. I think that's the appeal that she has to these creeps at the school.
I get that, and I agree with that. I definitely think that's what the movie is trying to do. But having been, a virgin in high school, and gone through that kind of experience, I was definitely made fun of. I wasn't hit on. Like, it was more seen as, like, something other girls would bully me about more than guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's not like I was not part of a purity cult or anything. It was just a very small school where everyone knew everyone, and everybody knew I wasn't dating. But, so... There's a lot of, like, the core relationships, there's a lot of the core character that's just missing here that I would have wanted to be beefed up. And I also think, in Jennifer's Body, the male characters are more complicated. Yeah. There are definitely some that absolutely deserve what happened. But there are also others that just didn't, or were just in the wrong place. And so that makes her a more complicated villain, too.
Yeah, we were talking about... A remake would be great of this film. I honestly, I mean, maybe I'm projecting, but I think having a trans femme person directed would be very interesting, because I kind of look at this film as, like, a part of my life that used to be all of my life. And I think having that perspective of being on both sides, of, like, seeing what the guys want and then, seeing what women want, and also just, like, the way guys talk to other guys when they're alone, kind of... I kind of talked about this before, that trans women have a lot to offer, and which is unfortunate that we're being not treated very well in the world right now. But I do think, like, to me, I saw a lot of, like, my friends in these guy characters. I mean, same with like Jennifer's Body. Like I saw guys like this that were that gross and would say horrible things about like I'm gonna be the one to take this person's virginity, or I'm like, oh man, I scored it. You know, like it is a really gross culture, and I also do kind of find it fascinating at the same time.
I mean, I agree, and it's not a space that I've ever been in personally, but I was kind of a tomboy kid. I had a lot of cousins. You know, and in college, especially, like I started dating more. Like, so I kind of got two sides of the different story of like not being like being overlooked and then being like sought after, which is kind of an interesting experience. I think in general, having more women behind the scenes, and trans women are women, so having more trans women behind the scenes, having more trans people behind the scenes, the more experiences we have, the better stories we're able to craft. And this movie needed more experience. It needed to be more cooked to be the fully realized vision. And it just wasn't quite what I wanted. And I hope that there's a remake so that it could be, because I think there's enough of a structure there where you could really build something special.
Yeah, I think the filmmaker, you know, had his heart in the right place and tried his darndest, but, you know, just wasn't quite enough.
Yep. So, any final thoughts on the movie?
Yeah, I think we've covered everything. Again, this is not a complicated movie. It very much wears its message on its sleeve. It's not particularly subtle. It's not unclear in its message. And I think, and maybe this could just be nostalgia talking, like, because of how this film affected me in 2007, I do still see a lot of things that I like in it, regardless of a lot of the really bad stuff that was not as apparent to me in 2007 as it is now. But I also think, you know, your mileage is going to vary. I think you've, as a viewer, have heard the entirety of what this movie is, and that's either going to appeal to you or not. So, you know, if this is something that you're like, I've heard everything, but I still have that slight, then check it out. And if you're like, this is the worst thing ever, then don't see it. I mean, it really is just that simple.
I wouldn't discourage anyone from watching this. If you want to watch it, I think there's stuff here that's worth seeing, but take it with a grain of salt that there's stuff that's problematic, there's stuff that doesn't hold up, mostly in the theming and the messaging behind the movie. It's, you know, it's clearly written and directed by a man, and it shows.
I would like to see somebody that didn't grow up in 2007 seeing this movie and hearing their reaction to it, because I think it would feel like an alien planet to maybe some of the younger viewers of this podcast.
That's probably true. I was of age in 2007 to see it. I just didn't. So I guess you're seeing my modern and more harsh take. I also, just as kind of a funny note, the last actor in the last scene, he doesn't get any lines. So I was very much like, give this man a line so he can go use it on his SAG stuff.
I don't know if sticking out your tongue counts as a line.
No, they won't pay you extra for that.
Robert Borland's got some comments.
Okay.
So they say, I find the protagonist's fear of losing control over her urges, especially compared to her stepbrother's indulgence, hits on a tendency I see in working-class conservative communities. A good example is J.D. Vance's description of his conversion to Catholicism as a way to tamp down on what he sees as people around him. Example, his mother giving in to urges for drugs or violence. Note, I detest the man and everything he stands for. He is just a publicly known example. It would be interesting if Teeth was remade by a director like Catherine Breillat. I'm not sure how you say that. Which I'm going to look up what else they did. I'm blanking on what else that director has done. Give me 1 second on that. But I agree with the points that you're making. This definitely does feel like a conservative person's nightmare. In a lot of ways. And I think like what you're talking about too is very interesting, especially nowadays. It seems like this path towards religion as a way to like fix your problems is like strangely common for 2025. I think about that Grimes tweet where she said like, I can't believe I'm going to join Catholicism because it's actually getting me to quit vaping. And it's like, that's an interesting place for our world to be. And obviously Grimes is a very specific kind of person, but it is I think it is kind of telling of what you're talking about. You know, like maybe the only way to not get into drugs or alcohol is just go into religion. And I don't agree with that, but I think that from that, like you said, that working class conservative community, yeah, I think there is something to that.
Well, and while you look that up, you did remind me of a point that I wanted to make that I was about to forget, so thank you.
Yay!
Which is the view of purity that we see in the purity culture cult, as I'm calling it, which is, you know, basically just Christian fundamentalism.
Mm-hmm.
It's extremely damaging. It's extremely harmful. It's extremely sexist. And the women are buying into it too, and that happens in real life. But Dawn even says when she finds the textbook being, you know, marked by this big sticker where you can't see what a vagina is supposed to look like, that, well, it's because women are different, women are more delicate, and it's that kind of view of men are this and women are this that is very harmful, because ultimately we are people. You know, women have equal right to orgasm, or at least we should, and if not, you know, someone is doing something wrong. And it's that view that feeds into this idea that men need to be hypersexual, and what happens to a man if you don't meet that, right? Like, you're not masculine enough. What happens to a woman if you are not delicate enough, or, oh my god, you enjoy sex? Like, this movie leans on a virgin and a whore dynamic in a very extreme way, in a way that I think is problematic, because it just does espouse harmful meanings at the beginning of the movie, when Dawn is a more psychologically stable person. And it does that. I mean, I know why, like, the film is doing it to expose what she'll become later, but that doesn't excuse that it does it in the first place.
Yeah. Also, unfortunately, I'm not sure if Robert Borland was aware of this, but the director in question has been accused of sexual misconduct within the last year, so that's all we're going to say about that person.
However, I do agree with the point, like, a female director with a female vision,
absolutely.
We're all there for.
Yeah. Well, I think I feel pretty good about that. Any other things you want to say?
No, I think we have.
It's
closed.
okay. I just want to say, Robert, you're okay.
You didn't know?
We didn't know. No. I just looked on Wikipedia and I just saw this tag that said sexual assault accusations. Like, okay, yeah.
And you're fine. This is why we looked that stuff up, and I'm glad we were able to promote that on this podcast, because that's what we want to do, is make sure that things and people are safe.
That's right. We are canceling Catherine, the person. I can't even pronounce her name.
Brela,
a French filmmaker.
or Brele. Anyway, so now it is my pick. And in light of my esteem for our current administration and all those folks therein, I'm going to lead hard into DEI stuff. We need diversity, equity, and inclusion. So screw that. We're going to do Deliver Us from Eva.
Right. Movie I have never seen, so I am very excited for that.
Oh, it gets wild, and I'm looking forward to seeing your reaction.
Okay. Do not know what that means. Thank you all so much for tuning in and checking this out. If you like what you see and like to see more of me, at least, you can check out my channel, where there are also more episodes of the Cootie Cast with me and Jess, along with video essays on all sorts of media. This is a media criticism analysis channel, and I like to go into topics that I think aren't as spoken, I guess, or aren't as developed as I'd like them to be. Yeah, it's more fun to talk about things that haven't been talked about as much than to just regurgitate something that's been said 100 million times. Yeah, if you want to see more, we're here every month. Usually the last Friday of the month, unless something happens. You know, we're only human. Jess is not to be found. Don't find Jess. Jess is hitchhiking across the USA to cut off dicks with her vagina in every state.
Don't tell on me on the podcast.
It's right. It's fine.
It's never happened.
She's gonna wear a different wig, so it's gonna be like a different person.
All right. Well, bye y'all.
Bye everyone.